An intro to the manual muscle assessment video. Corey Kessler is the subject and Monica is the filmographer. And I, James SanNicolas, will be voicing over throughout the video. So starting out first on the assessment would be the foot and ankle complex, and specific to the anterior tibialis. As you see in the video, I have Corey in the supine position. I'm currently getting his leg to rest in order to then dorsiflex his foot and invert while he holds, and I have to evert and plantar flex his foot in order to see if there's compensation or strength deficits. As you can see, each leg was pretty strong, receiving the grade of a 3. And as we move forward into the video, I then am going to test his posterior tibialis, where I set his foot into passive plantar flexion and inversion of the angle, while he tries to dorsiflex and evert. And that's where I hold the test. And as you can see, both are fairly strong. Each of the ankle complex has its strength of a 3, and we move on to the next section. The next section being the knee complex. I have placed Corey in the supine position, hip flexion, and we are passively placing his knee in flexion and tibial internal rotation. As you can see, the video is in freeze frame right now, so I'm describing that I'm going to gradually apply an increasing pressure to the posterior lower leg in the direction of knee extension and knee and tibial external rotation. And so as we move on into the clip, I am now assessing that, and in the video, Corey shows that he has no weaknesses or compensations in so far the right leg, and now we move to the left leg, where both legs show that Corey's strength levels are a 3. And now we move on to the next section of the knee complex, and we move on to the biceps femoris, and Corey will be in the same position as the medial hamstring complex, and I will be assessing the knee flexion and tibial external rotation while I apply gradual and increasing pressure to the foot in the direction of knee extension and tibial internal rotation. As you can see through Corey's right leg, we are able to assess that by extending his knee and internally rotating his tibia, and both legs show a score of a 3. Now assessing the hip complex, we start out with the iliac psoas, especially the iliacus and psoas major. As Corey is in the supine position, we'll be getting his leg into hip flexion, and I will be applying gradual and increasing pressure to the distal end of the femur in the direction of hip extension, while this shows whether or not his psoas major and iliacus are strong, and Corey shows grades of a 3 in strength in both legs. Now moving on to the TFL, the tensor fasciae latae, I am getting Corey into hip flexion, internal rotation, and abduction passively, while I will apply pressure to the medial foot or ankle in the direction of hip extension, adduction, and external rotation. Each leg is showing great strength, both receiving scores of 3 because there's no compensation or weakness shown. Moving on to the sartorius, I will get Corey into hip flexion, external rotation, and abduction with knee flexion. I will be applying gradual pressure to the thigh and lower leg in the direction of hip extension, adduction, and internal rotation of knee extension. So with that being said, I am showing you that I'm performing this act on Corey's sartorius of both legs, and no compensations are shown, so both receive 3. And so now we move on to the gracilis. I am getting Corey in the supine position, and hip adduction, knee internal rotation. And so I'm stabilizing both legs, and I am putting pressure in the lower leg in the direction of abduction and external rotation, and both legs showing great signs of threes. Now moving to the adductor magnus, both vertical fibers and oblique fibers will be tested, and first I am assessing the vertical fibers. While I get Corey in the prone position, I am placing his leg in hip extension, internal rotation, and adduction, and I am going to increase pressure to the lower leg in the direction of hip flexion and abduction. And showing from the video, Corey's legs both show great signs of strength, and the vertical fibers would receive a strength of 3. And now we move on to the oblique fibers, where I allow his leg into hip extension, external rotation, and adduction of both legs, and I will apply pressure to the lower leg in the direction of hip flexion and abduction. And as you can see in the video, his oblique fibers show strength of a 3 and a 2, because when I assess his left leg, his right leg splays out, showing a compensation to hold his strength up, receiving a grade of 2. Now moving on to the adductor complex, I am getting Corey in the supine position and hip flexion, internal rotation, and adduction of his leg, and the assessment will be placing pressure in the direction of hip extension, abduction, and external rotation. While I perform this act, it shows the strength of the adductor complex, and Corey in both legs, as seen in the video, shows no compensation or weakness, allowing his score to be a 3. As we move on to the final hip complex muscle assessment, I will be assessing the gluteus maximus, getting Corey in the prone position, getting his leg into hip extension, external rotation, and abduction, and this will activate his gluteus maximus, and I will apply pressure to the upper right leg just above the knee in direction of hip flexion and knee abduction and internal rotation. And I will then stabilize his lower back with my other hand and apply pressure, testing his gluteus maximus' strength, and due to the video, it shows that he is both strong in each gluteus maximus muscle, thus receiving a score of a 3. We now move into the final complex that we're assessing, being the shoulder, and I will first be assessing the latissimus dorsi. While Corey is in the prone position, I am getting his arm and shoulder into extension, adduction, and internal rotation of his arm, and I will apply pressure in the direction of the shoulder flexion and abduction. And as you can see in the video, each shoulder that I'm assessing is showing signs of strength, though his latissimus dorsi is activating, and he has not shown any weakness, though on his left arm he has a very excessive rotation in the internal rotation where I got confused, but I was able to readjust and assess, and he receives a grade of 3 in the latissimus dorsi. And now we move on to the rhomboids, where Corey's still in the prone position. I'm adducting his scapula and giving a downward rotation, and I will apply pressure to the distal humerus just above the elbow in a downward direction toward the floor. This is showing Corey's strength of his rhomboids, and in both rhomboids actually, they showed great strength, both receiving a grade of 3 while I applied the pressure. Into the next video, I will be assessing Corey's lower trapezius. I am putting Corey in the prone position and adducting and depressing his scapula with an outward rotation. I am applying force to the lower arm just above the wrist in a downward end direction toward the floor. And as you can see, his lower trapezius in both arms show signs of weakness, where it's very easy to push his arm down, and this shows that he has weakness, both receiving a 1. I will now be assessing the internal rotators of Corey, and this is in particular the subscapularis and teres major. I will be stabilizing his shoulder and getting him into shoulder internal rotation, where I will apply pressure in the direction of shoulder external rotation. And Corey shows signs that he has both threes and internal rotators, and in doing the opposite for his external rotation test, he will go into shoulder external rotation while I apply pressure in internal rotation, and both receiving a score of a 3. And with the final assessment of the muscle assessment, I will be testing the serratus anterior, and when Corey is in the upright position, I will lift his arm into scapular upward rotation and abduction of his arm. And as you can see, I will apply pressure downward, tracking the movement of the scapula. And from the video, there is no signs of weakness, thus he receives a score of 3. Thank you so much for your time.